Welcome to the world of Paranormal M, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Prepare to be amazed as we explore the mysteries that lie beyond the veil of the unknown. Subscribe and turn on notifications to join us on this journey of discovery. Let's unlock the secrets together. Gettysburg Ghosts. In the late fall of 2015, me and my family decided to go to Gettysburg for vacation. Being a big history lover, I was stoked to see the battlefield. The weather was amazing and the atmosphere was somber and peaceful. The first day was mostly spent at the museum and walking parts of the battlefield. Nothing really happened until we were getting ready for bed in the hotel room. My brother sat up suddenly in bed and ran to the door, opening it and stepping into the hallway. We asked him if he was okay, and he asked us if we had heard men yelling orders and cannon fire. We had 4 people in the room. No one else heard anything. The next day, while we were on the battlefield near Devil's Den, it felt as if someone was constantly following behind us, even though no one was there. That second night, as we got ready for bed, there was cannon fire, and this time we all heard it, including some of the other guests who had come out into the hallway. The third day, we were at Little Round Top, and I decided to crawl between some rocks and get a perspective of what the sharpshooters would have seen. While laying on my stomach, I felt someone lay a hand on my shoulder and whisper in my ear, "I see him." At first, I thought it was my brother until I heard him call my name from the statue that sits off to the side. It was so odd after that, I kept feeling as if I was about to turn around and bump into someone. I got to the point that I turned around and I felt extremely cold, as if I had walked into a freezer. My mother, who was beside me, also noticed the temperature difference and commented how odd it was. Later that evening, about an hour before the sun went down, me and my mom took the car to see a couple more things and take some pictures. We were at the high water mark taking pictures and thinking about, what could have been going through those poor men's thoughts. Brought tears to our eyes, and we both heard a man say, "Don't cry for me, lass." The atmosphere sort of shifted, and it felt extremely peaceful and relaxing. It was as if whoever it was trying to comfort us. We both sat there for a while until it was time to go. As we walked back to where we parked the car, there was a couple sitting beside the car. They said hello, and we had a small conversation, and in mid-conversation, we all stopped talking. From the battlefield, we all heard fifes and drums. The couple seemed unnerved, and they got up and said goodbye, got into their car. We decided that it was time to leave, since it was almost dark and no one should be on the battlefield at night. Our last day there, we toured Eisenhower's home, and then toured Big Round Top. Eventually, my brother and father wanted to go back to the hotel, so we took him back. We decided to go back to Big Round Top, seeing as it was our last day to explore. We parked the car and walked into the forest. We had about 2 hours before the sun set, and no one was around. About 20 minutes into the hike, my mom stopped. I was about to ask what was wrong when I heard footsteps. There were multiple footsteps that we could hear, and they stopped. Then when we would start walking again, the footsteps would start up. At one point, we decided to turn back. My mother needed rest, so we sat on a boulder. It suddenly got quiet to the point that there were no crickets, birds, or any other forest sounds at all. Then all at once, we heard horses snorting and trotting and galloping past us. Then it full-on sounded like we were in the middle of a battle. Bugle sounds, clashing of swords, muskets firing, and lots of men yelling. We were in complete shock, and it lasted a couple of minutes, and then it all stopped. We started talking about what we had just witnessed, and then we heard several men calling out, "Help! Help! I don't want to die!" and crying. was so overwhelming that we booked it back to where we parked the car, and when we got the car to the parking ranger, he was just there. He took one look at us and asked, "What did you all see or hear?" We explained what happened, and he told us that he had stopped a man that he thought was a Union soldier reenactor. He had told him he wasn't allowed on the battlefield after dark. He said the man smiled and with a shrug carried on. He said he was about to stop him again when the soldier walked through a tree and disappeared. We went back to the hotel, and the next morning as we were eating our breakfast in the dining area before checkout, me and my mother and brother heard a bugle playing. But no one else in the dining area seemed to hear it. It was all a bunch of strange events. But we did go back, and we had even more experiences the second time. We have several pictures where you can clearly see soldiers on horseback and soldiers around different spots on the battlefield. I may upload pictures if I can, if you get a chance. It's a great place for history and the paranormal. Was my house haunted, or am I being haunted? So my childhood house was built around the 60s or 70s. My parents bought it in the 90s, and they remodeled it. Neighbors used to tell me that something awful happened there. Something regarding death, but I was too young to remember exactly what was said. My mom doesn't like to talk about it. But what I do remember is being told that when they were digging, they found clothes and bottles with some sort of spells or works buried. For context, I'm from South America. We are, pretty damn superstitious. And we know and heard of white and dark magic. I was a loner as a child, a very quiet and sensitive kid. I cried a lot. So, never really got to have my own room up until I was about 12. That used to be my older brother's room, too. My brother was a mean person to me, always punched me, made me cry, and psychologically abused me. Anyway, once I got his room, which was the darkest and coldest of the house, my mood started to change. I was sad all the time. And me being a teenager and a closeted gay, I had my problems, but that room felt like it was draining. I could only sleep and cry. I tried to self-harm when I was 9, but when I was in my room, the urge increased, and it got me to successfully self-harm for the first time and then continue on for years. Every negative feeling was heightened. I used to wake up in the middle of the night because I felt watched. Sometimes I couldn't even sleep because the feeling was dreadful. I had massive migraines that were heightened by light, so I had to spend more time in my room in complete darkness. But I wasn't the only person experiencing things. When my brother behaved badly, my grandma used to see shadows standing in front of his room. We were sometimes awoken by the sound of a woman walking on heels early in the morning. My family's Catholic, but my mother's actually a practicing one, so she used to pray in all of the rooms when we were at school. She said that when she was in my room while praying, she would get goosebumps and massive headaches, but she carried on because she knew about my depression and stuff. Once we moved, I started to improve. My mental health improved a ton. I do have bad days, but nothing like I experienced in my old home. I've only been back once at my old room with my mom, and I could see her goosebumps, and I had the instant massive headache. Once I left the old house to its new owners, I haven't been back. I'm wondering what the house haunting was, or if I'm being haunted. Because now in my new home, a friend who's stayed twice since then. Well, when I'm not in the room, she hears me walking, and sometimes she hears me calling her name, in quotes. But she knows it's not me. My mom, a couple of months ago, saw a white figure walking toward my room and thought it was me, but I denied having moved out of my room. I don't know if it's of help, but my mom marked a cross with holy water on my bedroom door, and I also collected old cameras. But I don't think the cameras have something to do with the things that started to happen. Weird experience. After I graduated high school, my family and I moved into a townhouse into a different city. The Saturday after we moved in, everybody had to work, so I was left in the house alone, which I've never been afraid of being alone, and I'm still really not afraid. I was upstairs unpacking my room, just getting ready to take a shower, and for reference, the upstairs has a large mirror and a sink in the hallway. Then the door to the bathroom's on the left, and my bedroom's on the right, so I can see the bathroom from my room. It's also a small hallway, only the width of the sink and the cabinets, so I'm literally 2 steps from the bathroom. Anyway, I was home and getting ready for showering and just undressed and walked across to the bathroom and closed the door. I haven't even turned on the light in the bathroom, that's how fast all this happened. That's when I hear, very clearly and distinctly, somebody coming up the stairs and walking right over to the sink. I hear someone rummaging through the cabinets like they're looking for something. Meanwhile, I'm in the bathroom frozen in fear because I genuinely think someone's inside my house. My heart is beating so fast trying to figure out what to do because someone's out there, but I left my phone on my bed and I have no clothes except a towel. It felt like I was in there forever, but the sound wasn't going away. I could feel someone's energy out there. I worked up the courage to open the door, and I don't know what my plan was, if it was a real person, but I guess I just felt that I had to do something. The hallway was empty. Ran over to my room, closed and locked my door, got dressed, and then went through the house to investigate. There was no one there. All the doors to the outside were still locked. I left the house because I was so unsettled by the whole thing and didn't want to be in there alone anymore. My parents literally thought I was crazy. They said it was probably the next-door neighbor since you can hear a lot of what they do through the walls, but it's never sounded like that again throughout all these years. We've had 2 different neighbors living next door since we moved in. My sister has had 2 other experiences that have freaked her out as well. She had a sculpture on the wall next to her bed. That's where our Ghanaian friend, that they brought it back from Africa. It's pretty heavy, so we have to kind of use really thick screws to hold it up on the wall. My sister had her bed pushed up next to the wall, so when she would fall asleep, the entire wall was to her right. One morning my sister woke up, and the sculpture was laying on the other side of her pillow, not next to the wall as if it had fallen, but on the other side of her. We were so freaked out because it had fallen. It would have made so much noise and would have, seriously hurt her. Still can't explain that one. She also had experiences where she had woken up with her door open, and she's definitely closed it before going to bed. She's also not a sleepwalker. Everyone in the house closes their door to go to bed, so it's very odd. We've only really had those experiences during the almost 10 years my parents have been in the new house, but they're so weird and random that I have no idea how to explain them. I've moved out since, still haven't really experienced anything like that. My grandmother came to say hello. This happened 2 days ago at around midnight. I was completely sober watching YouTube videos on my computer in the kitchen, and at this point I was alone downstairs as my parents had gone to sleep. My brother was upstairs playing video games. I'm sitting there listening to a commentary video and I begin to hear music from another room. As I paused the video, it took me a few seconds to realize that it was the distinctive sound of a wind-up music box. Now for context, my maternal grandmother passed away at age 86. I was about 17, that's like 6 years ago now. She was my best friend, and I have a tattoo of her favorite flower, a hydrangea, and that's in her memory. She was such a wonderful influence in my life. I think about her often, and on this particular day, ironically, I had a dream of her the previous night. I had been thinking about her earlier in the day. She and her sister had matching wind-up music boxes that feature a seesaw with wooden little girls that rock when the music plays after being wound up from the underside. When she passed away, we took many of her items, including the music box, which she was very fond of. Also, I remember being in her house when I was younger, and sometimes the box would play a few notes for maybe a second. Well, if it had been wound up recently, due to the mechanism inside and the spring's tension. I walked into the dining room where the box is sitting atop a chest-level dresser. I know it hasn't been touched recently because I asked my parents and brother, and as I got closer, I saw the seesaw rocking. It continued to play music for at least 10 seconds. From the time I first heard the music begin and got up to check out what the time was, I stood watching and it lasted for 20 to 30 seconds. As I stood there, I felt an overwhelming surge that it was my Nan saying hello. She was a very calm and strong person, and, well, she'd been through a lot in life. She always had a kind word and reassurance for those around her. It seemed that she was offering solace, especially in these current times. As I had this thought, the box softly wound down and stopped playing. The box has never done this to anyone to my knowledge since we inherited it. Since my Lan loved that little box and I'd been thinking of her, and because it played for so long, it sounded like a full cycle as we saw this little seesaw rocking, it's difficult for me to debunk, especially because it likely hasn't been touched or disturbed for at least 2 years. Unexplainable footstep noises. And my floor fan just moved, but nothing bumped it. This is a long one. So I just recently moved into a new rent house with my boyfriend and our 2 little boys. It's the first house that we've really ever rented, and we love it. Or at least, we did. It's an older house with like a gas-hot water heater and a range. The house has wood floors, a crawl space, an attic, and an add-on that used to be a small 1-car garage. Our landlords had bought this house for their son who played football and attended at the university near here, and he had a couple of roommates. So a little backstory. We co-sleep with our 3-year-old and our 1-year-old. Our 1-year-old sleeps in his pack-and-play in our room by the foot of our bed. We've slept this way for both of our boys' lives and keep the door closed and locked at all times during the night. I literally wake up every night 2 to 3 times to check on the boys and put their covers back on if it's chilly, or to go to the bathroom. The 3rd night of us staying here, I had woken up as per usual. I just looked at the boys and I didn't have to sit up for once, and I saw that they were fine, settled myself to go back to sleep. That's when I hear someone freaking book it in our little hallway, and my jaw dropped. My boyfriend woke up in shock, like, holy nuts, did you hear that? So I called the cops immediately. While I was on the phone, I started crying and stressing because I could hear shuffling in the kitchen. We had nothing in our room to protect us or for self-defense. Dispatch stayed on the phone until the cops arrived. We had 5 surrounding the outside and 4 inside searching our house. It had been raining for the last 2 days, so they checked all points of entry and for witness. Wetness. But everything was locked and dry, and we were dumbfounded. I was far too afraid. Packed my boys up at around 3 a.m. and headed to my mom's because what the fuck? While I was on my way to my mom's, I'd called my boyfriend to talk about everything, and he started freaking out because he heard a loud bang in the back of our room. I turned around to head back and shine my headlights in the back window to see if somebody was messing with us, but there was nothing. Boyfriend found the courage to check it out, and it was some wall canvas art that we had leaned up against the wall earlier that morning, and, well, I ended up just unpacking the kiddos, and we all went back to bed, and this was July 22nd of 2020. Since then, I've had all the locks changed, just in case, and I brushed the whole thing off to be old settling house noises. Whatever, I didn't believe in paranormal stuff, so it had to have been something perfectly explainable that we had missed. I've woken up a few times last week feeling my bed shake. We have a wooden platform bed on wood floors, and if one of us adults moved a little bit, the bed would scoot. So I brushed those moments off like that's what had happened even though nobody had moved. Everything happens at night. I've heard the steps one time last week and thought nothing of it due to the locks being changed. I know absolutely no one is in this house at night because we do a sweep before bed. Early this morning around 4:30, I was awake laying in the dark with some stupid song stuck in my head. That's when my son's pack-and-play creaked loudly, which it always does when he stands up in it or somebody leans on it. So I sat up really quick to check on him, thinking he was standing up, and then I heard two very prominent footsteps walk away. Baby's fast asleep in the middle of the bed the same way he had fallen asleep that night. The second I lay back down, the creak happens again. And 2 minutes later, my little guy started to act restless and wake up. Hell no, hell nope. I woke my boyfriend up and he was like, there's nothing we can do. Which is true, but what the fuck? I've left it alone and have finally comforted myself this afternoon saying it must be my grandma who passed away a year ago. I was very close to her. Whatever again had been my way of thinking, until I shit you not, I was sitting on my bed and my floor fan frickin' rocked like someone had ran into it. It was right beside me. I checked to see if my toddler was on the floor crawling and had pushed it, or maybe it stuck and lifted on the nightstand beside it. Maybe even a toy or something was under it and gave in, but nope, not a dang thing. It was there. Immediately, just went for a drive. It's a bit much, and I feel like I'm going crazy. The fact that I heard my child's bed move and heard footsteps leaving his area has me sick to my stomach. I've been such a skeptic. When we came home after our drive, our toddler was being silly and annoying us. He had just left his room with his daddy and shut the door behind them. My boyfriend was folding and putting away clothes and went to open the door. The damn thing was locked from the inside. We had thought our little guy did it from the handle lock. Nope. There's a type of hinge lock mechanism that can only be locked from being inside the room and manually doing it while the door's shut. It's a door reinforcement, I think. Anyways, I forgot to mention that when we had gotten home, I spoke aloud to whatever. It felt like a complete idiot doing so. I said something like, we want to coexist and not to be bothered, leave our children alone. We want to leave you alone. And then I yelled, I believe in God and he's got my back for whatever reason. Like that would make a difference. And then the frickin' door being locked situation happened. We're going to get a carbon monoxide reader to check the house out, but for the most part, I need suggestions on what to do. Sudden activity in my home. Skeptic, but parents confirm something is weird. Little backstory. I, a 28-year-old female, live with my husband, a 30-year-old male, and 2 toddlers. 2 nonverbal, but understand everything, and female 2 doesn't talk great yet. We're in a basement apartment under my parents' home. This is the house I grew up in, and my grandmothers did both pass here 6 or 7 years ago, but they were old and ready at the time. Other than that, for the least 20-plus years, nothing's really happened, but this sort of Home Alone, creepy vibe from time to time. At the moment, my kids are sharing a room and a bed. We just redid my daughter's room and waiting on a bed to come in the mail. Yesterday, I put away all the toys in the son's room and lined his Batman playsets along the wall on a built-in shelf. Afterwards, I took my daughter upstairs to my sister, laid down for about 45 minutes in my bed, got up, dressed, and left for work. After I left my parents, I only entered the apartment twice. Once for extra pull-ups and clothes, and once for some old TV trays. Both entered my son's room and didn't see anything amiss. About 5 to 6 hours later, I'd come home, grabbed the kids from my parents, and headed downstairs to put them to bed. My husband wouldn't be home until after 11 p.m., and it was 9:30-ish. As I'm putting the kids in bed, I realized the Batman toys were pulled out from the wall, and some turned sideways. The bin of Batman figures had looked like it was gone through. I was like, weird. Maybe the kids were down here at some point. So I go upstairs and ask my mom. My mom looked at me like I had 3 heads when I explained what I'd found. My dad was listening from the bathroom door while I was explaining. Both came down and were like, what the fuck, when they saw. I then realized the toys had been stepping over in the middle of the floor weren't where I'd left them either. My mom pointed them out and said, "Were they like that when you came in the first time?" I said, "Yeah, I didn't notice, but I had to step over them." She then told me 100% for sure those weren't there when she came down hours earlier. Even my dad, who's very logical, confirmed it was weird and creepy. What would bring on sudden activity like this? I'm a skeptic, but open to possibilities. Nothing's changed in recent months, and we did find the freezer open once after coming home when no one had been home all day. Everything was still frozen solid. Ask Reddit. When I was around 10 or 12, I woke up late at night needing to go pee. For context, my bedroom and my parents' bedroom at the time were next to each other. There's a small washroom like 10 steps away that faces in the direction where you can see both bedrooms and a small hallway in between. So as I was sitting on the toilet doing my business, I happened to leave the washroom door slightly open. As I was about to stand up, something caught my eye outside of my washroom door. When I looked, there was an old lady standing right outside the door. She had long, curly gray hair that covered her face, and she was wearing an old dress. I was stunned. For some odd reason at the time, I thought that if I pushed the door closed, she would be gone. But when I opened it, she was still standing there. She hadn't moved an inch. I tried doing this 2 more times, but on the 3rd time when I opened the door, I decided to look down. I didn't notice beforehand, but when I looked down and saw her feet, it was dangling and hovering off the ground. That's when it hit me. I was terrified and I couldn't leave the washroom because she blocked the way to my parents' bedroom. So I locked the door and just yelled for my mom. It takes my mom about 5 seconds after hearing me yell to run to the washroom door. What I didn't mention was that my mom was already awake at the time. Her door was slightly open when she saw me walking to the washroom, and she heard me closing and opening the door. She thought it was weird, but just decided to keep a lookout to watch me come out. But it wasn't until I yelled that she got up and checked the whole apartment. The old lady disappeared by the time my mom got to me. All doors and windows were locked. Ask Reddit. I was staying in a cheap chain hotel in Liverpool on a shopping trip with my mom. The room that we had, which we shared, was the absolute standard for this chain, and most others that I've seen in UK hotels anyway. Had a double bed and then a single bed that can be like a sofa type thing if you don't need the second bed. My mom was staying in the double and in the single. It was in the middle of the night and I was like 16 or so I'm not used to city sounds. I'm from the ass end of nowhere and used to dead silence at night pretty much. The single bed was by the window with the double bed between it and the room door and suite. Another thing I'll mention before I get into it, because I'll get there, I promise, is that I know I was awake. I wasn't half asleep, I wasn't lucid dreaming or experiencing sleep paralysis. I could move and talk, and I know I was awake. So my mom got up out of bed and was acting really weird. She was holding eye contact with me really intensely and she got out of bed. She was on the far side of the double bed to me. She walked to the corner of the bed along the foot edge toward me, then crawled up onto the side of the bed closest to me. She was wearing a stripy night dress thing. She loves a nightie. and had the standard bedhead, and at no point did she break this eye contact with me. Started to talk to her, asking her what the fuck she was doing, and then assuming she was sleepwalking, repeating "Mom" louder and louder to wake her up. I knew what she was doing was weird, but I felt completely and truly safe, not a single hint that I wasn't safe or should be concerned. She got off the bed and moved, walking backwards back toward the door of the room, and after I yelled "Mom" loud enough, it woke her up. I heard my mom rather pissed off, and I'll add, she was saying, "What do you want?" from her bed. That's where she still was, and had been for the duration, fast asleep. I was a bit gobsmacked, can't lie, kind of ignoring this initially. I figured it felt safe, it couldn't have been anything harmful. However, my mom wasn't wearing a striped nightdress to bed that night. This thing, what I recall it looked like, was tall, very skinny, and had weird eyes. It made me think that she was sleepwalking. Its eyes looked sclera like those sclera contact lenses. This shit wasn't my mother. Crawled onto the bed in a way that I realized in the morning couldn't have been my mom. My mom is short, and she struggled to get up onto the bed, and it was a very high bed, so I wouldn't have been able to crawl up into it that easily. I continued to feel completely fine with my experience, and I felt at the time, surely I was completely safe. Felt calm as if it was my own mother that I was talking to. Surely it was something friendly. And then later the next day I told my friend about it. She wasn't of the same opinion. In fact, she felt quite the opposite and asked me to draw it. Only once I drew it, I realized just how queasy I should have felt and just how concerning it is that I felt so safe. Ask Reddit. This story actually happened a week ago, and I still have my mother pretty disturbed by it. It was Thursday night, and I'd just come home from university. Yep, I still live with my parents since my uni's in the same city and housing is expensive. I hadn't had any late-night classes that day, so I was coming home at around 2 p.m., so it was still light out. Not some witching hour shit. I walked in the house through a glass sliding door, and my dog took this chance to go outside. My mom greeted me since she was folding clothes right next to the door. I closed the door behind me and had only walked a few feet into the house when my mother gasped. I turned around just to watch the sliding door open itself. My dog walked back in with a guilty look on his face, and the door closed behind him. And I should clarify that this sliding door is purely mechanical. We don't have some fancy automatic door opener. The door itself is extremely heavy, and also kind of broken, making it already hard to open. So when the door opened by itself, we were quite surprised. Either my dog has psychic abilities, or our house has a dog-loving poltergeist. 2. This story's much older. I would have had to have been only 7 years old at the time, and the story is really my mom's, but I'll tell it anyway. But before I tell you my story, you need to know some background information. I'm a type 1 diabetic, not the one you get for being fat. I've been like this since the age of 4. For those who don't know, this disease can cause my blood sugar levels to rise or fall sporadically. High blood sugars are not that much of a worry since most of their damage is over decades, but low blood sugars are an immediate danger. They can cause me to seize, which in turn destroys my brain. Now that you know that, I can continue. When I was younger, if my mom woke up in the middle of the night, she would come to my room and test my blood sugars by poking my finger to make it bleed. It sounds bad, but it's not that bad. But this specific night, she had stayed up later than usual, tested me around midnight before going to bed. She would later wake up at 2 a.m. and debate whether to test me again. Eventually, she decided against it, since she had checked my blood sugars only 2 hours ago and they were stable then. She then tried to go back to sleep, but she was startled when her phone rang once. The phone only played a ringtone once before cutting off, as it had never played. Calls at this late of night weren't a rare occurrence. My mother works with Child Protective Services, so she gets a lot of calls from distressed clients at random times of the day, but mostly during the night. My mom checked her call logs to see who called her, and found out her last call had been at 9 p.m., not 2 a.m. She was confused, but dismissed it as her imagination working overtime. But once again, the question going to test my blood sugars came up, and this time my mom gave in to her anxiety. Walked down the hallway halfway to my room just in time to catch me mid-seizure. If a seizure's caught quickly, the damage can be insignificant, but left on my own accord, I could easily die during one. With the help of my sleepy father, my parents would bring me back to consciousness using a substance called glucagon, a complex sugar that's great for increasing the blood sugar rapidly that can only be applied with an enormous syringe. To this day, nobody knows who called that night, but my mom likes to think it was my deceased great-grandfather, a Juno Beach veteran who passed away the week before after succumbing to severe bone cancer. But who knows? Ask Reddit. When I was a teenager, I was a camp counselor at a summer camp in the rural countryside. We had no real phone reception except 2 landlines, and cabins had no power. Really isolated spot. Big year was 2011. For those that don't remember, that was the summer Anders Breivik went to the summer camp and killed nearly 70 campers and counselors after his first attack. So in short, we were all on edge by a lot. Telling scary stories that summer was fully mixed. One of the night jobs as a counselor was to go and check cabins and the bathrooms to make sure all the kids were accounted for, sleeping and such. On this particular night, the power had blown. Something cut it, and we were in the middle of the woods, so it's basically pitch black save for the flashlights. The bathrooms were the worst to check. You have to pull back all the shower curtains to make sure none of the kids had done the unthinkably grim and hung themselves. It happened once in the past, apparently, and thus we have to check. So anyway, I'm off doing my round and hear the sounds of things moving in the woods, which generally isn't abnormal for small animals at night, but this was big, like a large person movement. Throw the flashlight in that direction and nothing's there. Kept walking. 30 feet later it's back, still nothing there. Get to the bathroom and make my way to the shower side, and there's a pair of legs in one of the showers. Closed curtain, pitch black. So I'm pretty much terrified at this point, but I'm like, well, it's the job, so I call out and get no response. So my fear went from a solid 9 out of 10 to about a 47 out of 10. Pull back the curtain, and there's a fellow counselor standing there fully sleepwalking, staring at me. Turns out he beelined it through the woods from his cabin somehow. So yeah, camp wasn't Ask Reddit. I've never actually seen anything per se during episodes of sleep paralysis, but I felt a presence in the room with me. When I was in college, I used to get sleep paralysis at least 3 times a week in the mornings. In the most common hallucinations, I'd be laying on my back with my eyes almost half shut, to where I'd only really see the lower half of my room with the top blacked out completely. I could see movement around my bed as if a person were walking around my bed from one side to the other over and over. It almost sounded like a man with a very deep voice talking on the phone, speaking low and unintelligibly. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but somehow knew that they were speaking English. It would go on until I could manage to wake myself up. It stopped for a long while until about a year ago. When I went into sleep paralysis, this time it was really different from times in college. Those times I'd almost always either be on my back or facing a wall and I was sleeping on my front. This time I was laying on my front with my face on my pillow, but I could somehow see the bedroom door behind me and see my body laying in my bed. It was as if I were viewing my room in third person. I saw this black humanoid creature open my door and just walk toward my body. This thing looked like a child's scribble drawing come to life, and its whole body sort of emitted this static. As it walked closer to my body, I could feel the static buzzing in my head violently. As it reached the side of my bed, it put its tendril-like arm up to my head, the stump of its arm splitting into long fingers around my neck. It felt like it had static, but burned and buzzed through my whole body, and felt like it went on for a long time till I woke up with a slight gasp, like nothing had happened. I couldn't really sleep much for a few days after that one. Ask Reddit. I don't know if this counts as a glitch, but it was definitely really weird and I can't explain it. I was driving alone, unfortunately, and listening to the radio. The song was about to end and I abruptly thought, they're going to play X next. And they did. When that song was almost over, I thought, now they're going to play Y. Repeat that 3 more times and I knew what song was about to play 5 times in a row. I couldn't really believe it. So I started saying the next song out loud to myself just to be totally sure I wasn't making it up in my head. The strangest part of it is how these thoughts came into my head. I've had bad ADHD and I'm kind of incapable of just thinking one thing at a time. Train of thought, writing exercises were impossible for me in school because I didn't know which train of thought I was supposed to be writing. It's really hard to describe, but when I thought of the next song, it was the only thing in my head. Everything else was just gone for a few seconds. The clarity of it was surreal. The only other time I've experienced that is when I was about to get into a car accident. A truck hit something ahead of us, started spinning out of control, and I remember my brain going completely quiet and thinking, that truck is going to hit us, right before it did. That wasn't a premonition, it was a realization, and I chalked it up to my brain going into some different mode because I recognized my life was in danger. Never experienced it again until that radio thing. Ask Reddit. Growing up, my mom was a bartender. She was a single parent, so I took care of my little brother most nights. One night while I was making dinner, I kept hearing a strange whistling sound. Didn't think much of it because it was storming pretty hard outside, but the whistling continued. It started to sound more like a melody than whistling from a storm. Started to get a little freaked out and asked my little brother if he was hearing it too, and he wasn't. Eventually, the whistling stops, but it's still storming pretty badly. Fast forward to the end of the night when I'm going to bed. I'm climbing up the ladder of my bunk bed and my TV shuts off. I think maybe the power went out, but the hallway light's still on. I try to turn it back on and nothing happens, so I reach around my TV stand and realize that it's been unplugged. At the same time, I hear the whistling, only this time it's not in the distance. It sounded like somebody was whistling directly into my ear. I could almost feel their breath. It sent chills down my spine. Still sends chills down my spine, and at that moment I took off running out of our house screaming. We live in an apartment with 3 other units, so I woke the neighbors above us, and they were a younger couple with 2 kids and offered to come check out our house. I could tell at the time the guy thought I was just a stupid kid hearing things, but was trying to make me feel better. My brother and I waited outside of our apartment while he went inside to check it out for us. After a few minutes he came back and he seemed a little agitated and asked if you're playing a prank. This really scared me, and I told him that we weren't playing a prank on him. We could probably, see that we were telling the truth by our faces. But maybe he could see the fear roll over. He said he looked everywhere and didn't find anyone, but was convinced someone was in our home. They invited us to stay in their apartment until my mom was home from work because they didn't feel comfortable with us staying alone. I never heard the whistling again, but so many other strange things happened to my brother and me in that apartment. I'm convinced it was haunted. I'm not sure if the story will be scary to any of you, but that was the most terrified I'd ever been in my life. Ask Reddit. I worked at a hotel that caught fire and had to be closed. It wasn't serious, just the electrical room, but the hotel had to be closed for repairs. Over the next couple of weeks, they kept one person on staff at the time to greet and redirect guests with reservations to other hotels. I was there alone in a 100-year-old, 200-room hotel for about 12 hours at a time. I was there into the small hours of the morning. Shit got weird. Our in-house phone kept going off, like the one you reach when you press 0 in the rooms. It was an old hotel, so it didn't say the room number. We just had closed all the blinds to the rooms when we first evacuated. But there was one floor, the 9th, where they just kept opening. I would stand outside the hotel and look up and see curtains to a window open that, I knew both of them had been closed 4 hours earlier. I knew that I was the only person in the building. Worst was the sounds. Bustling party noises coming from the banquet hall downstairs. Faint running sounds, talking coming from the elevator. Sometimes a dog barking, and honestly, me and the other employees called the cops several times each. We were positive there was someone in a room or on the floor. One time, though not with me, the cop confirmed the noises and called for backup to search the floor they were on, and nothing. On my last night there, I was doing my walkthrough in the basements. I was in like the sub-basement, located 3 levels underneath the lobby. Room service, kitchen, and storage mostly. I heard a thud like a tennis ball. This was near where the fire started, so I felt obligated to investigate. I'm shining my flashlight around the kitchen when I see what looked like a mouse scram across the floor underneath the shelf. It scared me, but I was relieved it was just that. Moments later it reappeared, but it wasn't a mouse, but a tennis ball. It rolled so quickly to the other side of the room I lost it in my flashlight. I booked it and spent the rest of the night in my car in the registration parking. Haven't set foot in that building again. Ask Reddit. I'm a physician, and I actually was just going to comment about seizures. Specific kinds of seizures that can lead to visual hallucinations, including the repeating of a segment of visual data. The time when people usually actually notice that something's not right as opposed to just getting confused is when they turn their head, but a portion of the visual field continues to repeat from their previous point of view. To make what I'm trying to say clearer, say you're sitting on a couch with a view of 2 doors on a wall directly in front of you. You see your friend come to the door on the left, walk to the door on the right, and exit the room. Then you see the same thing happen several more times. You might think he's walking in a circle through the same 2 doors if the doors both led to the same place, or that something unusual, like a glitch, is happening, if they lead to different rooms. You're probably not going to think a seizure is the culprit. Now imagine the same setup again, and this time your friend walks in the door on the left and exits through the one on the right again. Then you turn your head to watch TV. Only when you turn your head, you have a floating circle in one side of your field of view that contains a view of the 2 doors with your friend repeatedly entering and leaving. This time you'll probably think, holy shit, something's wrong with my brain. This is a very common hallucination when dealing with a specific kind of seizure. It can be caused by trauma to certain areas of the brain, such as caused by a stroke. It can also just happen sporadically. I wonder how many of these glitches I hear about that people are having are episodes that they just don't identify as such. Ask Reddit. Years ago I lived in an old coal mining town in Illinois that was founded in 1892. The house we lived in was right on the main street and was a salt box-style house where the miners would live. The house at one point was renovated to be 2 apartments, one upstairs and one downstairs, each with their own kitchen area and bathroom. My brother shared the larger room upstairs and had the bathroom, and my sister had the adjacent room. The bathroom was built into the attic area and had a hole cut out of the wall for the crawl space. The door was just the cutout section of the wall and would just lean against the opening. My sister's room had the other attic space, which was much larger. So one day we actually found some old papers in the floorboards of the large attic. A couple pay envelopes from 1893 and a newspaper from 1924. So after we found those papers and removed them, weird stuff would always happen up until we moved out years later. Strange noises mostly. Hearing my name whispered sitting in the bathroom late at night, and at times I saw an apparition of a woman dressed in period clothing walk behind me when I was sitting on the curb outside. I saw her approach out of the corner of my eye, and when I turned to look as she passed behind me, no one was there. By far the worst incident occurred one night at 3 a.m. I got up to use the bathroom but didn't feel like turning on the light. Since my brother was completely passed out, I just went in the door and the light off, and now the way the bathroom is set up is if I were standing in front of the toilet, there was a mirror to my left which looked into, gave me kind of a clear view of a leaning crawlspace door. While I was standing there peeing in the dark, I started to feel a bit uneasy, as if I was being watched. So immediately I looked in the mirror and stared at the crawl-space door. Suddenly, to my absolute horror, I walked and just watched that door slowly start falling open and crash down into the bathtub. I hunkered down, frozen in place with my eyes closed, screaming the most horrific scream I've ever let out in my life. My sister's friend was staying over her room and just ran to see if I was okay. It took me a while to settle down enough to fall asleep. The air was always dead in there. There was no breeze or anything blowing throughout the rest of the room, while the door was at such a lean that there was really no way it could have fallen open without being pushed. Hell, now that I'm thinking about it, I realize that I forgot that damn door would fall open every so often over the years, and I guess it occurred, that it didn't, God, they're writing confusing. I guess it occurred so often that it eventually became normal. A mysterious figure in the woods beckons. Is it a friend or a foe? A few years ago, I went on a weekend trip with some friends to a remote cabin in the woods. The first night there, we were all sitting around the fire, telling scary stories and laughing. As it got later, we decided to head inside and get some sleep. I shared a room with two of my friends, and we all settled into our sleeping bags on the floor. It was pitch black except for the dim glow of the embers in the fireplace. Just as we were starting to drift off, we heard a faint tapping sound on the window. First, we thought it was just a tree branch, but then we heard it again, louder this time. We sat up and looked over at the window, but we couldn't see anything outside. Then we heard a soft voice whispering our names. We were all frozen in fear, not knowing what to do. The tapping continued and the voice got louder and more insistent. Suddenly the window flew open and a cold breeze rushed into the room. I could see a dark figure standing outside, but its features were indistinct, seemed to be beckoning us to come outside. We felt an overwhelming urge to obey, but just as we were about to get up, the figure vanished and the window slammed shut. We were all shaken by the experience, couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day we tried to rationalize what had happened, but couldn't come up with any explanation. And to this day, we still don't know what or who we saw that night in the woods. Can someone tell me what I experienced? So, some backstory. I'm a supervisor of a moving company. I go out to do quotes and supervise when needed. I go in and out of houses weekly, too. Today I was doing a quote with a coworker. This man had a very large house, but newer. We go throughout the house and we go upstairs and walk into a room. Once I walked into the room, everything changed. I'll try to explain it best I can. So it was like I was underwater. The air was static and a clearish green color I've never seen before. I got winded and it was like I was hit with energy. Saw a figure from the corner of the room go around. It was like a lot of hair, black hair. It was in the corner and just saw black. I also saw two bubbles. It's the best way I can explain it. One bubble was horizontal and the other vertical. They were inside each other. I guess like orbs, but way bigger and more like a lava lamp. It was not a good feeling, but I personally didn't feel threatened. A woman in white popped into my head. What's even stranger, I look at my coworker and say this room gives me the creeps and has bad vibes, and he looks at me with eyes wide and says I felt it too. He said he never felt anything like that before, but didn't see anything. And when I say I see it, it's like with my third eye. And I've never had that feeling or visual before. I just had to read about it, but I didn't see it with my real eyes. What's even stranger is this man that we were doing the quote for at a hidden room behind the room where this happened. I'm very open to all this. I've read about it, I've watched shows about it, and I believed it. But today I lived it and experienced it. I don't know what to think or do, or know what it means. I've always kind of felt a little different. Always just knowing random things and being in tune with people where others haven't been able to. Feeling like people are sucking the life out of me. One more before I forget to post. I had started living in my aunt's house in 2015, due to me and my mom and stepdad not getting along. Living there was a good break from family drama. Everything seemed fine at first, but it started happening in waves. First incident. I was taking a shower after marching band after drumline. I didn't feel scared or get any weird vibes from the place at all. Suddenly during the shower, the light switch physically turned off. I thought maybe one of my cousins got home and did that, but not a single person was home yet. I discounted it as the switch being halfway pushed up and it was just a coincidence. Second incident. About to go to bed, shared a room with my younger cousin, and she falls asleep while we were talking. I get on my phone and the closet light does the same thing, flipped down by something. I tried to wake my cousin up and she wouldn't, so I carried both of us to the living room and we slept there. Third incident. It was Saturday. I was off school, so I was playing online games with friends. Aunt went to the store with cousins, and I heard footsteps the entire time through headphones, and they were loud and approaching, as one would say. Everything was silent when I took my headphones out, so I thought it was in my head. Fourth incident. Keeping this as short as possible now. We had most of the family over for Easter, I think, and we all slept in the living room. One of the other cousins from a different aunt walked all the way down the hallway to stare at a static TV. We had a dish then, so I assumed after the dish went out in our small town. But she stayed there and wanted to stare at it for 30 minutes, no fucking joke. I remember being too scared. Last instant. Before I moved back to my mom's after too much, it was a stormy morning and I had to catch a ride from the upperclassmen friends, so I had to wait longer than the bus. It wasn't running due to a flood or something, too many dirt roads. And keep in mind, I'm not afraid of storms. I've chased tornadoes with my significant other just for fun, and I'll tread lighting under a tree, just to be in the presence of any storm. Don't know what that means. There was a brownout. That's when the lights don't go out, but they're dim very low. I was a bit scared of the darker house after what had previously happened. I decided to curl by the door and wait for my ride. I suddenly heard footsteps from the back of the hallway. I didn't think for a second and started to unlock the door and run into the rain, and as soon as I nearly shut that door, the footsteps got faster, and suddenly they were right behind me. And as soon as I shut the door, it was all dark inside the house, like the brownout somehow quit when I was out of the house. I refused to look at any of the windows of the house itself. I sat in the rain on the curb in a thunderstorm to not be inside there. I'll never forget getting in trouble and my teachers blaming me for playing in the rain on purpose before class. I haven't stepped foot in that house since, and I never will. I've never experienced something like that since that house. Anyone know of roads mysteriously changing or shape-shifting objects? I was driving home from a theater with my girlfriend, and on the way there was a shit ton of construction on the highway. So we had to take detours coming back on the way home. We took all the same turns. We suddenly found ourselves in this winding road even though our map said that we took the right turn, with those streetlights and every outlet said the road was blocked off. So we kept going straight, or winding I guess, but it was pitch black outside. All the other cars, they were just gone. And by the way, everything turning onto the street was completely normal. No blockages, no cones, a street lamp, etc. Even signs saying where to turn, and we kept going, and as we turned to see these two fucking giant piles of rocks, like tiny construction rocks. In the center of the road, too. Absolutely swarming with bugs. It isn't very warm here yet, and they're equally spaced apart and just enough room to drive around them and get to the end of the road where it meets the main road again. They were taller than the car and visible from the main road, but we definitely didn't see them on the way there when the light was out. And with nothing around them, no cones, no reflective tape or construction machines beside the rocks, just a random road and a field next to the main highway. It's completely paved with curbs and areas with sidewalks, whereas everywhere else is run down. I immediately had a gut-wrenching, terrible feeling and told my girlfriend to keep driving, so we made it back to the main road and onto the highway. I take this route twice a day for the past week. It's always the same, and it's always simple. I've never seen this winding road or dirt piles. Ask Reddit. Don't know if this will ever be seen, but shoot, might as well post it since it's a fun story. Not a cop or anything, but a tour guide as a French and Indian war fort. The place has a reputation for being haunted, and the ghost hunters have been there, but overall it's a pretty quiet place. Most of the workers think people just hear the building creak and groan and attribute it to something paranormal when it isn't. But anyway, on one of my tours I was talking to an older gentleman, like 60 or 70. He was telling me that he realized he was a sensitive, can see and hear and feel ghostly presences easily. And that was when he was a little boy and his grandmother died. He told me he wasn't allowed to go to her open casket wake because he was too young. But while he was sitting home with the babysitter, he told his grandmother just suddenly walked through the door and came up to him, smiled and waved goodbye before disappearing. So when his family came home from the wake, he said to them, "Grandma sure looked pretty in her dress." They looked at him with question marks on their faces and said, "How do you know? You didn't see her." He told them, "She came to say goodbye," and then proceeded to describe in detail exactly what she was wearing. He said his family was stunned, so he gets to this part of the story and something odd happened. We're standing outside in the middle of August, so needless to say it was sunny and warm, when on my right side I can only describe it as I felt like somebody had turned on air conditioner like 2 feet away from me. It wasn't just a cold breeze or anything like that. It was continuous, lightly blowing cold air, and it wasn't stopping. I said to the man, "Do you feel that?" He looked at me with a little smile on his face and said, "There's someone listening in on our conversation. He's standing just a little bit to your right." The cold air persisted for about a minute or two while we just stood there in silence, when finally it disappeared altogether, like someone had switched off the air conditioner. And right at that moment, he said, "He's gone now." I've worked in the place for about 6 years now, and this was my only real experience, but I can still remember the feeling of that cold air, and how the air actually moved and blew, like a fan or from an air purifier or something. It made it all the more creepy. See ya.